Hello, online statistics. So we've talked about parts 1 through 4 of your project. So now we want to talk about 5 and 6. So for part 5, it wants me to construct a 95% confidence interval to estimate the population mean proportion in the claim. So what we want to make sure we do here is this would have been a good spot where for part 4, most of you guys probably did the mean and the standard deviation. And so you already have those two pieces of information. We also know our critical value, assuming that we're assuming that normal population, is we're going to use that Z, and that Z for 95% is going to be that 1.96. And that's a value that at this stage in the game, you've used within that confidence interval. So what I want to show you is for part 5, I'm going to include in the announcements a link to this Math is Fun site. If I go to that Math is Fun site, so if I have how many in the sample, I have 100. Let's say my sample mean is 50.3, and my sample standard deviation is 2.7. I have a 95% confidence interval. 50.3 plus or minus 0.53 would be the calculated value. So 49.8, because that's 7, you see how right next to it's a 6, I'm going to round that up. Or I would do 49.77, because that 6 would also be rounded up to 7 because of that 9, to 50.83. One thing I do not want to see in your project is I don't want to see 49.7699999996. I actually want to see it rounded to either 1 or 2 decimal places. And so then this is the very shortcut user calculator. However, I want you guys to do what? Here is your formula. So your formula is going to tell you I have your mean plus or minus the standard error. The standard error is the critical value that comes from your z-table times the standard deviation divided by the square root of n. That's your adjusted standard deviation. Why are you using adjusted standard deviation? Because this is a sample, it is not a population. That's why we're doing this, right? And so that's going to be your confidence interval. What can you conclude from this result regarding the claim? I'm also including a second link. That's going to be to an online stats book here. This confidence interval introduction is great. It's really telling you what it means. If you scroll down a little bit, you're going to see if repeated samples were taken and the 95% confidence interval computed for each sample, 95% of the intervals would contain the population mean. So that's what it's really saying. If I were to repeat this, over and over and over again, 95% of my of the time, I would have the population mean included in that confidence interval. If I had asked you to do a 90% confidence interval, you would have been 90% certain. And so it's basically saying if you do it over and over and over again, 95%, you're going to actually have that population mean in there. Because remember, we're doing a sample. For part 6, I want you to write a brief, no more than 2-page typewritten pages, summary of your general conclusions. So on this, give me a summary. I chose as my claim that I wanted to know how much money people spent on groceries per week. I asked 100 people how much they spent on groceries each week. And after I did that, I went through and I calculated various statistics. This is some of the information I came up with. So one of the things that I want to make sure, let's read this through because I wanted to give you a couple things. A summary of your general conclusions about the data you collected. Include your summary, any conjectures about the claim and or assumptions you had to make in order to complete this project. Also address whether you think it would be appropriate to make a broad conclusion from this analysis. For example, could these conclusions apply to an entire state, the whole United States, the world, etc.? Be sure to address any potential pitfalls within your data, things that may make your conclusion not as valid. This is where we really have to think about that bias. So for example, if I went to a Whole Foods and asked how much people are spending on their grocery bill, if I did that versus if I went to a ShopRite, chances are pretty good the total bill may be different. if I went to downtown Boston versus if I went to Podunk, Indiana, what's going to happen? Things typically tend to cost more in Boston than they do in Podunk, Kansas, or whichever state I just said. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad. It just means what? That it's part of a pitfall. It's a bias within your data. Where did you collect that data? What was the location? What physical store did you go to? What physical location did you go to? What type of people did you ask? Who is, i.e., it's a voluntary response if you're asking them, who's more likely to answer you versus not answer you? So you have to include those types of pitfalls, or i.e. biases. The world. Do you think Americans spend more or less on their groceries than somebody in Haiti, for example, or somebody in a farming community that has a farm outside or a greenhouse that they can get their vegetables from, versus they also have cows and chickens outside that they get eggs from and then they get their meat from? So you have to think about that second level of conclusion. So make sure you work through those pieces. You should incorporate charts, graphs, tables from Excel within your report. You don't necessarily have to use Excel. Use something, though. Your report should be no more than 6 pages once the tables, graphs are included. Note Part 6 does not include the prior parts. These items are separate. So that means you want additional tables and graphs. You could do what? A confidence interval. If you chose a pie chart and a histogram for the first part, maybe you want to choose a different type of picture, table or graph on the final part. Remember, you are presenting this report to someone who has little or no knowledge of statistics, i.e. you want to use it in English. You should be able to hand this to your mother, your brother, your sister, your friend at work, and they can understand what you are trying to say. Do not try to talk high level. Stay simple, and that will make it perfect. You do not need to overthink this project. The grading rubric is down here. So part 1, 15 points, and that's just to give me a table at the every 100 pieces of data. Part 2, answer it in complete sentences. Just don't give me numbers. What sampling technique did you use to collect the data? The sampling technique I used was. And so each of those questions is broken down to 5 points each. And then part 3, frequency distribution in the 2 pictures. That whole part is 15 points. The summary of at least 8 statistics, you get 10 points. That's basically opening StatCrunch and clicking on those buttons. Explanation of those 8 statistics, that's going to be 15 points. Confidence interval is going to be 10 points, so you could really get that just from what? If you use StatCrunch to get your summary, your mean and your standard deviation, you can put that in right there using the online calculator too. But 15 points for that conclusion. What does it really mean? Part 6, that final discussion. I want a summary of what happened, your assumptions you made, any conclusions, and any pitfalls, and using appropriate tone, i.e. what kind of bias. So it's 120 total points. I hope that you guys have a little bit more understanding about the project. And if you have any questions at all, please reach out to me.